Alina didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the HOA letter laid flat beside her laptop, rereading the allegations like they might somehow rearrange themselves into something sane. Multiple unlicensed animals, she muttered, shaking her head. Max was asleep at her feet, occasionally kicking in his dreams. The letter wasn't just absurd, it felt deliberate, targeted. Who would accuse her of such things without even talking to her first? It didn't make sense. She hadn't even spoken to half her neighbors yet, and the ones she did meet had been friendly, even warm. Except Karen. That woman had introduced herself the very day Alina moved in. Not with a welcome basket, but with a printed copy of the community regulations color, just to keep everything tidy from the start, she'd said, eyes flitting across Elena's lawn like a hawk scanning for worms. Elena remembered laughing nervously. Karen hadn't. And now this dot at precisely 8:03 the next morning, Elena stepped out in yoga pants and a hoodie and saw Karen already outside, pruning her roses. She waved with a forced smile. Karen nodded once and returned to her shears. Morning, Elena said cautiously. Lovely day, Karen replied without looking up. I do hope Max is feeling better. Elena blinked. He's fine, thanks. Oh, that's good. He seemed distressed yesterday, barking a lot, wasn't he? Elena studied Karen's expression. Too casual, too knowing. He barked once when the trash truck came. Elena said evenly, he's a dog. Karen smiled as if that explained everything. Of course, but some people around here are sensitive. To noise, you'd be amazed what upsets people. She snipped a final bloom and dropped it into her compost bucket. Some neighbors just don't like disruption. Elena let the silence hang. Her skin prickled. She knew exactly what this was. That evening Elena walked her dog down Oak Ridge Lane, phone in her hoodie pocket, camera recording quietly. She stopped at each neighboring house and knocked politely. One by one, she asked the same question. Had anyone submitted a complaint about noise or animals coming from her property? Each one said no. Some looked confused. Others seemed vaguely amused. You've got one dog, Mrs. Lanning said, chuckling. Unless you're hiding a zoo in your garage, someone's yanking your chain. It was Mr. Patel across the street who said something that made Alina freeze mid-step, you know, he said, scratching his gray beard. I did see that HOA lady, Karen, fiddling with my mailbox the other night. Thought it was odd. She pulled something out and put something else in. Figured it was board business. What night was that? Alina asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He thought for a moment. Tuesday, around 9, maybe. I'd just come in from my walk. Alina thanked him and kept walking, heart pounding now. The complaint had been dated Wednesday morning. Her mind turned over the implications. If Karen had planted that complaint, typed it, mailed it, and pushed it through the board as if it came from someone else, ... She stopped on her lawn, Max tugging at the leash. Eager to go inside. Karen stood on her porch, arms folded, watching, and this time, she wasn't smiling. Alina didn't plan to become an investigator, but the HOA had backed her into a corner. The accusation alone could trigger warnings, fines, and legal consequences under their strict code. If Karen expected her to lie down quietly, she had miscalculated. The next morning, Alina emailed the HOA, requesting a copy of the anonymous complaint for her records. She kept her tone polite, professional. Inside, she was seething. 2 hours later, the scanned letter arrived, a PDF, no metadata. It was typed in black Times New Roman on a clean white sheet with no letterhead or signature. But one detail made Alina sit up straighter, a faint floral watermark, barely visible when she zoomed in. Roses and vines. She'd seen that before. Karen's home office. Alina had spotted the same stationery during her awkward house tour 2 weeks earlier, when Karen insisted she join the neighborhood welcoming tea. A desk by the window stacked with identical, rose-embossed paper. It had struck her as old-fashioned then. Now it felt like evidence. She stared at her screen for a long moment, then took out her phone and snapped a photo of the watermark, just in case. That afternoon, while walking Max past Karen's house, she slowed and took note of Karen's mailbox. It was perfectly polished, with a tiny bronze plaque that read Whitmore. It looked harmless, innocent, but Alina was beginning to see the whole street as a stage. And Karen, the puppet master behind the curtain, she spent the evening digging through HOA policies. Buried beneath jargon and neighborhood clauses was a single line that stood out. All complaints must be made in good faith and based on factual, first-hand observation. Falsification is subject to board review and may constitute fraud under county statutes. Fraud. That word echoed in her mind as she opened a new browser tab and called in a favor. Her old friend Marco, a software engineer with too much curiosity and even more free time, picked up Alina. Wow, hey, what's up? Think you could help me trace the origin of a scanned letter? Marco chuckled. Sounds juicy. I'm in. She forwarded him the file, explaining the situation in pieces. Marco didn't ask too many questions. Give me a day, he said. If it came from a home printer, there's usually a signature buried in the metadata, unless it was scrubbed, but most people don't even know it exists. She hung up and stared out the kitchen window, trying to quiet the storm inside her. What was it about Karen that made this all feel personal? It wasn't just the complaint. It was the smugness, the slow, calculated way Karen acted like she owned not just her house, but every rule, every lawn, every neighbor. The next morning brought a knock. Not the polite kind. Alina opened the door to find a neatly dressed man holding a clipboard. Behind him, a uniformed HOA inspector stood quietly. "We're here to conduct a property review," the man said, standard follow-up to the animal nuisance complaint. Alina stared at them. "I've already responded to that. There's no basis for this." "Routine check," the clipboard man said. "Just want to confirm compliance." Max barked once. Alina stepped aside, letting them in, her heart racing. They checked the garage, peeked into her side yard, sniffed the air like they were looking for contraband. Max followed them, tail wagging. After 10 minutes, they left. "No violations observed," the inspector noted, "but we'll keep the complaint active until the board votes to close it." Alina closed the door behind them and leaned her back against it, pulse thudding in her ears. Upstairs, her phone buzzed. A message from Marco. "Bingo, traced the scan. To an Epson XP600, same serial number you gave me from the welcome tea pics. Belongs to your neighbor, Karen Whitmore. That's her printer." Alina stared at the screen. Now she had proof, and Karen had no idea what was coming. The first time Karen realized something had shifted, she was kneeling in her garden, arranging river stones along the base of her fountain. A silver Toyota she didn't recognize slowed at the curb. Its driver, a tall man in sunglasses, snapped a photo of her mailbox and drove away. No wave, no acknowledgement, just the soft click of a camera and a barely audible hum of the engine. Karen stood, dusted off her knees, and scanned the street. Something was off. For once, it wasn't her doing the watching. Across the street, Alina sat on her porch with Max curled beside her and a closed laptop resting in her lap. She wore a faint, unreadable smile. Karen lingered on the curb just a moment longer than necessary, then turned back toward her roses. Inside, she made a call. "Straight to Marcia Kent, the HOA president. Just thought you should know," Karen said in her practiced voice. "The woman at 217 may be trying to stir something. I saw someone photographing my property today." Marcia sounded distracted. "HMO, you mean Alina Reyes? I thought the inspection cleared her." "Yes," Karen said quickly, "but that doesn't mean she's not retaliating. I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to manipulate something." Marcia sighed. "Karen, we've got a dozen noise complaints to deal with. I'm not sure one new homeowner's curiosity is anything to panic over." Karen hung up, her lips pressed into a hard line. Inside Elena's home, things were far from panicked. She had spent the afternoon compiling everything. The photo of Karen's distinctive floral paper, the file metadata from Marco's scan trace, screenshots of neighborhood texts confirming no other complaints. And now, she had a copy of the bylaws printed and tabbed, with section 9.3 circled in red. Knowingly filing a false complaint or impersonating another homeowner constitutes grounds for immediate board review and potential legal action. What she didn't have yet was traction. The board, for all its rules and resolutions, was designed to protect its own, especially someone like Karen, long-standing, loud, feared. That changed when Alina found Devin Clark. Devin had just been elected to the HOA board 6 months earlier, a quiet, date-obsessed numbers guy who had moved into Springwood after selling his startup. Most people didn't notice him, but Alina had remembered seeing him speak up at the last HOA meeting, suggesting updates to the financial disclosures. He'd been dismissed quickly by Karen, with a tight smile and a sharp wheel circle back. She found his email in the HOA directory and sent him everything. No accusations, just the facts. Within 2 hours, he replied, "This is disturbing. If you're right, we may have a serious ethics violation. Let's talk." They met the next day at the corner cafe, outside Springwood's gates, neutral ground. Devin wore a blazer despite the heat, with a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "I've had a few concerns about Karen's behavior already," he admitted, sipping iced tea. "But this is orchestrated. You think she's done this before?" Alina asked. "I think she's gotten away with it before," Devin said. "But I also think this time she left a trail." By the end of their meeting, he agreed to present the findings to the board quietly at first. No formal accusations, just a request for internal review. Alina appreciated his caution, even if every nerve inside her wanted to scream it from the rooftops. That night, Alina passed Karen on the sidewalk. Their eyes met. For once, Karen's smile faltered just slightly. Alina said nothing. She didn't need to. The tide had begun to turn, and Karen could feel it. She just didn't know how fast it was rising. Devin's hands hovered over his keyboard, longer than necessary before pressing send. Attached to his message were 2 files. One, a packet of evidence linking the anonymous complaint to Karen's personal printer. The other, a quiet request to convene a closed board session. Under Section 11.2 Ethics and Conduct Review, he knew the fallout wouldn't be clean. Karen had long-standing connections. She chaired the beautification subcommittee, managed the HOA newsletter, even hosted the annual 4th of July potluck. Calling her out wouldn't be an investigation. It would be war. but facts had weight. And this time, Alina had given him the hammer. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday evening. Devin didn't tell Alina, not yet. If things went south, he didn't want her dragged into the fallout until absolutely necessary. He did, however, return to the HOA archives that week. Combing through the last year's complaints, he found 3 that raised red flags, all anonymous, all typed, all related to nuisances that conveniently coincided with residents. Karen had openly criticized at meetings. There was the Henderson family on Birch Lane, accused of operating a car detailing business from their driveway, claimed that forced them to shut down their side hustle and eventually move. Then the Tran couple, supposedly allowing Airbnb guests in violation of the leasehold covenant. The board had fined them before realizing no guests existed. And finally, a complaint about Mrs. Lanning's excessive window displays, which nearly led to a compliance penalty until she threatened to sue. Devin dug into the digital records and found the same scanning pattern, same Epson model, same faint floral watermark. Karen had been the ghost behind the curtain for years. That Friday, just after sunset, the board gathered in Marcia's living room. Cookies sat untouched on the coffee table. The mood was tense. Devin spoke slowly, presenting the data, the metadata, the complaint patterns, a timeline of events. At first the room was quiet, polite, disbelief. But as the pattern emerged, Marcia's frown deepened. "This is a serious accusation," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Do you understand what you're suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting," Devin said. "I'm showing you. Karen's been using anonymous complaints to target residents she personally dislikes. She's manipulated board decisions, pressured owners, and, according to our bylaws, broken several ethical mandates. I want to hear her side," another board member said. "She deny it," Devin replied. "She always denies it. But if we let this go, we're telling every homeowner that the rules don't apply equally. We become part of it." Across the street, in her 2-story colonial, Karen stood at her kitchen window and watched cars line up near Marcia's home. She hadn't been invited. That fact didn't sit well with her. She stirred her tea 3 times clockwise, a ritual for calming herself. But the tremor in her hand made it splash over the rim. The next morning, the email hit her inbox. Subject HOA. Board action pending review. It was cold, formal, and worst of all, not addressed personally. Just a summary of findings and a notification that she would be required to attend a special session. Karen dropped her phone. For a moment, she simply stood in her kitchen, staring at the screen on the floor. She hadn't felt fear in a long time. Not like this. Outside, a jogger passed her porch. Karen didn't notice the phone camera angled briefly toward her house. Another photo. Another angle. This time, it wasn't Alina, and it wasn't someone she knew. The narrative was escaping her grip, and Springwood Pines was finally watching her for real. Karen had been blindsided before, twice in fact, by her first 2 husbands, but nothing stung quite like the hollow formality of the HOA summons in her inbox. No "Dear Karen," no respectful prelude, just a lifeless directive. Appear before the board, submit any relevant materials, and prepare to respond to questions of ethical concern. She read the line 5 times before it felt real. The next morning, she arrived at the community clubhouse 30 minutes early. She wore a cream blazer, hair coiled in a meticulous bun, and a fresh application of blush to mask the tension gripping her jaw. She had spent all night combing through old HOA minutes, rehearsing responses. In her world, preparation was power. She wouldn't go down without a fight, but the moment she stepped into the room, she felt that subtle shift in air. The way conversation stopped half a second too late. Devin sat beside Marcia with a laptop open, flanked by 2 board members who nodded at Karen but didn't smile. No one offered her coffee. The usual pleasantries were missing. Karen cleared her throat. "I understand there's been some confusion." Marcia folded her hands. "You're here because the board has reason to believe that you submitted false complaints under anonymity, and used those to influence decisions affecting multiple homeowners. That's an outrageous accusation," Karen snapped, then softened her tone. "I've served this community for over a decade. I've volunteered, organized, enforced the standards when no one else would. And now I'm being accused based on what? A coincidence." Devin turned his screen to face the room. "We traced a scan of the complaint letter to your home printer. The metadata includes the serial number and timestamp. The watermark matches paper visible in your home during the HOA orientation video. The same printer was used in 3 other anonymous complaints over the past 18 months. Karen's mouth went dry. "I had discarded all kinds of paper. Anyone could have taken it." "Karen," Marcia said gently, "did you write the complaint about Alina Reyes?" Karen hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "No," she said finally, her voice losing steam. "I was given the letter by a neighbor who wanted to remain anonymous. I don't remember who. They slipped it in my mailbox." "You submitted it," Devin said, scrolling through email logs. "You too scanned it from your email account at 8:42 a.m. Wednesday morning and forwarded it directly to the board. You labeled it from multiple neighbors." The room sat heavy with silence. Karen's hands twitched in her lap. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe," she said, Quietly now. She has a big dog. It barked. It's not a lie. If it might become a problem. That's not how the rules work, Marcia said, and it's not how the law works. Devin added. Karen looked around the room, seeking even a flicker of sympathy, but the faces staring back were tired, resolved, unmoved. Marcia closed the meeting with a vote, a unanimous decision to suspend Karen from all board-related activities pending a formal hearing. An independent review would be submitted to the county's HOA compliance office. Karen sat frozen. On her way out, she passed Elena in the hallway. Their eyes locked. Elena, Karen said through gritted teeth. I hope you realize what you've started. Elena didn't flinch. No, Karen, I know exactly what I've started. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over Springwood Pines. For the first time in years, the streets felt quiet, not out of control, but peace. And inside Karen's mind, the silence was deafening. The official envelope arrived on a Thursday. It bore the seal of the county prosecutor's office and the understated weight of something irreversible. Karen sliced it open at the kitchen counter, her fingertips trembling slightly, the blade of her letter opener shaking just enough to tear the edge. Inside was a single sheet of ivory paper, neatly typed. You are hereby summoned to appear in municipal court. The words blurred momentarily. Karen gripped the counter, her heart hammering. The letter continued with a list of charges: falsification of official records, harassment, and potential misuse of postal services, all stemming from the HOA complaints she had submitted under false pretenses. A copy had been sent to the Springwood Pines HOA board. Another was headed for the local newspaper. That morning, her power vanished in an instant. The board issued a notice, formally removing her from all positions. The Beautification Committee, the Rules and Enforcement Division, the Events Planning Circle, even the newsletter, the Piney's Post, which she'd edited herself, announced her resignation with a sterile two-line blurb on the second page. She called Marcia 3 times. No answer. She tried Devin next. Straight to voicemail. Panic clawed up her throat like smoke. That evening, as she took her trash to the curb earlier than usual, as if trying to reclaim routine, she heard it. A whisper. A door shutting a little too quickly. Laughter that stopped the moment she turned. They were watching her now, just as she had once watched them. Elena, meanwhile, had kept quiet, publicly at least. She declined media interviews and ignored the buzz on the community app, where screenshots of Karen's court summons circulated under blurred usernames and vague hashtags like hashtag HOA fraud and hashtag Queen of Rules Falls. But inside her home, she documented everything. She printed emails, saved voicemails, and kept a timeline on her wall, with colored string and pins connecting complaints to outcomes. She wasn't gloating. She was preparing. At a meeting with her attorney, a sharp, quick woman named Dana Wu, Elena laid it all out. Dana nodded through it all, barely blinking until the final page. You realize, she said slowly, tapping the HOA bylaw sheet, this isn't just civil. If those letters influenced sales or penalties, she may have impacted property values. That's mail fraud. That's intent. She wanted people gone, Elena said, and she got what she wanted. Until now, Dana replied. The case moved fast. Karen's reputation had been a fortress for years, but now it was glass, and the cracks were multiplying. Local journalists picked up the story. HOA enforcer faces criminal charges after fabricated complaints. A news van parked outside the subdivision gates for 2 days straight. One neighbor, emboldened by the headlines, came forward with a voicemail Karen had left threatening a code violation over unauthorized bird feeders. By the time Karen appeared in court, the courtroom was packed. She wore gray slacks and a pale blouse, her hair down for the first time in years, as though untying the bun might unspool the damage. Her voice wavered as her name was called. Her attorney pled not guilty. The judge set the next hearing date and dismissed her with a warning: no further contact with complainants. On her way out, Karen made the mistake of glancing at the gallery. Elena sat quietly in the back. Wrote out she didn't smile. She didn't need to. The walls that Karen had once used to box others in were closing in around her now, and for the first time, there was no rule she could bend, no policy she could weaponize, and no one left willing to shield her from the storm. Springwood Pines had seen its share of drama: stolen Halloween decorations, a feud over mailbox colors, a turf war about trampoline visibility, but nothing had ever gripped the community like the slow, painful collapse of Karen Whitmore. Trial date hadn't even been set, and already her name was everywhere, whispered during morning dog walks, posted anonymously in online groups, and scrawled as a punchline in a chalk hopscotch trail outside the park. Kids who once feared her glares now mimicked her clipped tone on bicycles. Violation. They shouted at each other between fits of laughter. The control she once wielded like a badge had become a parody. Even her house seemed to sense it. Her once pristine garden was overrun with weeds by week's end. The porch light flickered, left her American flag, always starched, straight, perfect, now drooped at half-mast in the breeze. Her neighbors stopped waving. Some crossed the street when she approached. Others, like the trans from 3 doors down, simply glared at her car as it passed and shut their blinds. Inside the clubhouse, Devon led the newly energized ethics committee through a formal review of the HOA's complaint procedures. It was an exhausting process. Every form, every policy, every file touched by Karen's years on the board was under scrutiny. The damage ran deeper than they'd expected. She knew the system better than anyone, Devon told the board at their next meeting. She used the ambiguity in the complaint process to hide her fingerprints. The fact that she got away with it for this long means we failed to— Alina attended that meeting quietly, sitting in the back, taking notes. No one asked her to speak, but when Devon mentioned the new policy, no more anonymous complaints, all grievances must be signed, and witnessed, she nodded. The room followed. Karen, meanwhile, had been advised to lie low. Her attorney warned her, no retaliation, no statements, no interference. But silence didn't suit Karen. She was used to being the voice, the presence, the authority, and without her title, she turned to the next worst option, social media. Facebook posts surfaced days later in the Springwood group. To the residents who think gossip is justice, I have given my time, my weekends, and my sanity to protect this neighborhood. One mistake does not erase a decade of order. Beware the wolves in polite clothing. Though she didn't sign her name, no one needed to guess. The comments were brutal. Most weren't from Alina. She never responded, but others had waited years for a crack in Karen's armor. You ran the Hendersons out over an oil stain. You fined me for planting tomatoes in my backyard. You measured my grass with a ruler. Karen, a ruler. By the next morning, the post had been removed, and Karen's account was suspended for violating community guidelines. But the damage wasn't digital. It was real, and it was spreading. The final blow came in the form of a bright orange notice, nailed to the post on Karen's lawn. Property in violation. HOA, mandate weeds. Unmaintained shrubbery. Expired permit flag display. Karen stood on her porch in her robe, holding her coffee like a shield, staring at the very paper she used to tape to others' doors. This time, it was hers. Alina passed by minutes later, Max trotting happily beside her. Their eyes met briefly, and Karen opened her mouth like she might say something, but no words came. What do you say to someone who saw straight through you? What do you say when the neighborhood you ruled has turned its back? The courtroom was silent, except for the rustle of papers and the occasional clearing of throats. Karen Whitmore sat alone on the bench, her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The months since her suspension had been a slow unraveling of the world she once controlled, but this moment was final. The judge's gaze was steady and unwavering. You have been found guilty on all counts. Falsification of documents, harassment of neighbors through false complaints, and misuse of postal services, the judge pronounced. The words echoed in Karen's ears like a hammer striking cold iron. Karen's lips pressed together, but no words came. The courtroom buzzed with a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Alina sat near the back, her expression unreadable, though her eyes gleamed faintly. She had fought for this moment, not for vengeance, but for fairness, for the restoration of her neighborhood's trust. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and neighbors gathered, some offering congratulations, others simply wanting to witness the end of a chapter. Springwood Pines was changing. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board welcomed Alina's quiet leadership not as a board member, but as a liaison. She declined formal titles but helped draft new policies to ensure transparency and fairness. The anonymous complaint rule was overhauled. No letter or email would be accepted without a verified signature and supporting evidence. The neighborhood's spirit, once strained under Karen's iron rule, began to heal. Gardeners swapped tips. At the community market, children played under the open sky, and the whispers of suspicion gave way to conversations of renewal. Karen Whitmore moved out quietly, selling her house to a young couple eager to become part of the community's fresh chapter. Her legacy lingered like shadows, but so did the lessons learned. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Alina stood on her porch, Max by her side, watching neighbors light their porch lamps and greet one another. A soft breeze carried the scent of blooming roses. She thought about the battle she had fought, the sleepless nights, the phone calls, the uncertainty, and felt a cautious hope in a neighborhood governed by rules. It was the people who gave those rules meaning, and sometimes it took standing up to one person's deception to remind everyone of that truth.